Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in Kentucky's history. Before we start, please let me know where you're watching from and what time it is when you listen to this narration. We want to know where and when these documented accounts reach people. It was 1903, and autumn had come to Harlan County, Kentucky, in a way that was strange and bitter. The mining town of Cumberland Gap was surrounded by hills that seemed to swallow sound. To people who didn't live there, it was just another coal town that was dirty, poor, and forgotten. But people who lived there knew better. They knew about the hollow beyond Raven Rock, where the Hollow brothers used to live. Even today, no hunters go there after dark. The county records from 1903 only say that Thomas and Elijah Hollow, the Hollow family, were declared missing in November of that year. The investigation lasted exactly 3 weeks before it was suddenly stopped. There were never any bodies found, and there were never any suspects named. County officials boarded up the brothers' small cabin at the edge of Black Mountain Hollow and let it rot. But the official papers don't say why the search parties stopped looking after the first week, why the sheriff's handwriting gets noticeably shaky in his last report, or why the whole town decided never to talk about the Hollow brothers again. It was like everyone silently agreed to forget, but some things just wouldn't go away. The Cumberland Gap Register says that the Hollow brothers came to town around 1897, when the coal boom changed southeastern Kentucky. Even though they were 5 years apart in age, they were tall, thin men with the same faces. At 36, Thomas was the older of the two. Elijah, on the other hand, rarely spoke more than a few words to anyone. They bought a small piece of land far from town, built a simple cabin with their own hands, and mostly stayed to themselves. The deed of purchase, which was found in county archives during a project to digitize records in 1962, has some interesting information about how they got the land. The Blackwood family owned the land they chose, but they left it after a mining accident killed 3 of their sons in 1889. For years, no one claimed the property because it was far from town and close to what locals called the Bad Hollow, a narrow ravine where fog hung around all year. The Hollow brothers bought it for a small amount of money, using newly minted coins that the clerk said felt cold to the touch, as if they had been stored underground. Cumberland Gap was growing quickly at the same time they got there. The Louisville and Nashville Railroad built more tracks into the area, which brought in a lot of workers from all over the Appalachian region and allowed for industrial-scale coal mining. The number of people living in the town grew 3 times between 1895 and 1900. The Hollow brothers should have been unremarkable in this mess of new people and chances. But from the start, there was something different about them. A ledger from Walsh's General Store dated September 1897 says, "Newmen T&E Hollow bought supplies today. They asked for 40 pounds of salt and no food items. They were interested in old maps of the area, specifically cave systems. E. Hollow stood watching the street the whole time, while T.E. did business. Neither of them took off their hats. Most men didn't want to work the night shifts, but the brothers did. They worked in the Blue Diamond Mine. Jacob Whitley, their foreman, wrote in his employment ledger that they were exceptional workers, tireless, but unsettling to other men. Request they continue on night rotation. The brothers never missed a day, never complained about the dangerous conditions, and saved almost all of their money." Whitley's personal journal, which was found in 1965 during the estate sale of his grandson, has more honest thoughts. "The Hollow men work like no miners I've seen. They need very little light, move through the narrowest tunnels with ease, and seem to know where the coal seams are before we open them. The other men won't work with them anymore, saying their picks strike the rock in perfect unison, no matter how far apart they work, as if they share one mind between 2 bodies. Their case is especially strange because they don't seem to exist outside of their work. No church records mention them, even though religion was a big part of community life. There are no receipts from the general store for anything other than the bare minimum." Samuel Burke, the town's photographer, said that the brothers refused to be in any group photos of the mining crews. The only known picture of either brother is a blurry figure in the background of a town meeting in 1899. A tall, thin shadow stands at the very edge of the frame, with its back to the camera. In 1967, imaging experts from the University of Kentucky looked at this strange photo. Their report says, the figure looks unusually long, about 15 to 20% taller than the people around it. The strange light absorption around the figure is even more interesting. The shadow looks like it's bending in ways that aren't possible, and the grain of the photo is messed up in a way that suggests it was exposed to very high temperatures, but only in that one area. People say that the Hollow brothers were quiet, hard-working men who should have been forgotten by history. Instead, they became the center of what old-timers would later call the silence that saved Cumberland Gap. Land survey maps from 1898 show that the brothers' cabin was at the meeting point of three natural features: a limestone ridge to the north, an underground stream that briefly came to the surface before disappearing into the mountainside, and a natural depression that locals called the Witch's Cauldron because fog gathered there in perfect circles. The location broke a number of Appalachian folk rules about where to put a home. It was hidden from view on the main road, sat where three shadows met at noon, and there was no clear path to it, just a winding trail that seemed to go back on itself. Martha Jenkins, a local midwife and herbalist, wrote down local superstitions in her household almanac. The newcomers have built where no home should stand. The Blackwood place has been avoided for reasons the older families remember. The ground there doesn't hold prints. Seeds planted return nothing but pale, twisted sprouts. The brothers either don't know or don't care about such things. The brothers quickly settled into a routine in Cumberland Gap. They worked at night, went to town once a week to get supplies, and spent the rest of their time at their cabin in the woods. Sometimes, Thomas would go to the county records office to look up old land claims and mining surveys. Josephine Miller, the clerk, wrote to her cousin that he asked for the oldest maps available and took a lot of notes on the original survey of the area from the 1782nd. He was especially interested in areas that were marked as unexplored or hazardous terrain. The Hollow brothers lived this quiet life for almost 6 years. In 1899, Thomas asked the town for permission to dig a well on their property. This was the only time they had a significant interaction with the town. The request was approved, but County Surveyor William Hayes had some concerns about the proposed depth. The applicant insists on excavation exceeding 60 feet, which is far beyond what is needed for the water table. When asked, they said they needed more depth to control the temperature. There were geological concerns, but the permit was granted because the property is in a remote location. Dr. William Forrester, the town's only doctor, wrote in his journal that the problem started in August 1903. His entries, which were found decades later during a renovation of his old office in 1965, are the only first-hand accounts of the strange events that happened before the brothers went missing. August 17th, 1903. I was called to the Collins farm after young Peter Collins, age 19, was found wandering along Shawnee Trail in a state of extreme distress. The boy appears physically unharmed, but has not spoken a word since being found. His eyes track movement, and he responds to simple commands, but makes no attempt to communicate. Mrs. Collins reports he had gone hunting near Black Mountain Hollow 3 days prior. I have administered a sedative and recommended rest. A week later, Dr. Forrester wrote, August 24th, 1903. Peter Collins is still in the same state. There is no physical cause that can be found. When shown a map of the area and asked to point out where he had been hunting, he became very upset and tore the paper to pieces. His reaction to darkness is the most worrying. As the sun sets, he gets more upset. He needs to be restrained at night to keep him from hurting himself. Robert Collins was a well-respected farmer whose land bordered the forests around the hollow. Peter Collins was his oldest son. Family Bible records say that Peter was going to marry Emma Whitaker in November of that year. He was a young man who was active, well-liked, a church deacon, a good hunter, and had a great memory. His sudden illness shocked the community and marked the start of Cumberland Gap's darkest time. The Harland Historical Society did an interview with Emma Whitaker in 1968 that has never been published before. It gives us more information about Peter's condition. The Peter that came back wasn't the same man. His eyes didn't focus right. It was like he was always looking at something just behind you. He'd flinch at shadows, and his skin was always cold to the touch, no matter how many blankets we piled on him. The doctor said it was shock, but it was more than that. It was like part of him never came back from those woods. More strange things were reported in September. 3 farms next to the hollow lost livestock. Hunters said the woods were unusually quiet. There were no birds singing or animals running around. Franklin Moore, one of the last people from that time to be interviewed by the Harland Historical Society in 1968, said, "It wasn't natural, that silence. You'd stand in those woods and hear nothing but your own heartbeat, like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something." Without any signs of a predator or a fight, 6 sheep died on the Millbrook farm in one night. Someone had neatly unlatched the gate to their pen. Samuel Millbrook's journal entry from September 8th says, "They didn't run. Something led them away willingly." Sarah Thompson, who was 12 years old at the time, said on September 12 that she saw a man made of shadows standing at the edge of her family's property, which was next to the forest near the hollow. Joseph Thompson, Sarah's father, wrote a letter to his brother in Louisville about what happened. Sarah's imagination has been running wild since her mother died. But this was different. She wasn't excited or trying to get attention. She was scared. She said the figure stood outside our house for hours, and when she finally called to her older brother, it smiled with too many teeth, and then stepped back into the trees. We found strange boot prints in the soft earth, very narrow, very deep, as if the wearer was carrying an impossible amount of weight. The Hollow brothers, on the other hand, kept doing what they always did, working at night and staying to themselves. But people started to see little changes. Thomas used to talk to people when he needed to, but now he didn't talk to anyone. During shifts deep in the mine, Elijah would sing softly to himself, old folk songs that echoed eerily through the tunnels. Their foreman said their work was still perfect, but more and more miners refused to work anywhere near them. Jacob Whitley's journal from late September contains a troubling observation. The eastern shaft, where the Hollow men have been working alone, has yielded an unprecedented amount of coal. The company is pleased, but something doesn't add up. The volume they're extracting exceeds what should be physically possible for 2 men, even working double shifts. More concerning is the coal itself. Our buyers report it burns hotter and longer than any other from our mine, but produces a peculiar blue flame and leaves no ash, only a fine black powder that the wind won't disperse. A small earthquake shook the area on September 28. It only lasted a few seconds and didn't do much damage. But a lot of people in town said something strange happened. Every clock stopped for exactly 12 minutes at the same time as the tremor. This piece of information can be found in many personal accounts, such as Reverend Howard Grant's diary. Brother Simmons came to me in distress, saying that his pocket watch stopped at 2:17 and then suddenly jumped ahead to 2:29. I didn't believe him until Mrs. Abernathy said the same thing about her kitchen clock. Then I saw that my own clock showed the same problem. Maybe this is a sign that time isn't as fixed as we think. Things changed on the 12th of October 1903. There is an interesting entry in the shift manager's log. T&E Hollow did not come out of shaft 7 at the end of the shift. A search found nothing. They reappeared at the mine entrance 3 hours later, clothes soaked, even though there was no water in that section. T. Holler asked for 1 month off right away, which was granted because of their excellent work record. This event happened at the same time as another earthquake, but this one was too small for most people to feel. But the Cumberland Gap Telegraph Office's instruments picked up the noise. Miles Crawford, the operator, wrote in his log, "Unusual seismic activity registered from direction of Black Mountain at approximately 4:13 a.m. signal, interrupted for exactly 3 minutes." When transmission resumed, experienced high-pitched tone on all lines for approximately 17 seconds. For the next 2 weeks, no one saw the brothers in town. People could still see smoke coming from their cabin chimney from a distance, but they didn't have any visitors or show up. Dr. Forrester's journal says, October 28, 1903. Sheriff Parsons asked me about Thomas Hollow, who came to his office today with a strange request. He wanted official paperwork to dig up a grave. When asked whose grave, Hollow reportedly smiled and said, "No one is buried there yet." The request was denied. Sheriff says Hollow was acting strangely calm, with unfocused eyes, as if he were looking at something beyond the room. The stress in Cumberland Gap kept getting worse. Peter Collins still hadn't said anything. 3 more hunting dogs went missing after getting too close to the Hollow. And on November 2nd, people saw a strange light coming from the Hollow brothers' cabin. It wasn't the warm yellow light of a lamp. It was a cold blue light that some people said pulsed like a heartbeat. Sheriff Parsons got the most detailed account of this event from Martin Weber, a German immigrant who worked as a night watchman for the railroad. "I was looking at the Eastern Line when I saw it. A light that looked like nothing natural. It started at the chimney of the Hollow place and spread out like water rippling. The trees around the cabin seemed to bend away from it. The air felt thick and hard to breathe. The strangest thing was what happened to my lantern. The flame froze in place and didn't flicker until the blue light faded. Then my lantern went out completely, even though it had just been filled." The first frost of the season came on November 3rd, which is very early for this area. Farmers said that the frost formed in strange ways, like perfect circles, complicated spirals, and what several sources called writing in no language known to man, which appeared on barn doors and windows all over the area, all pointing toward the Hollow. Thomas Hollow made his last visit to town on November 4th. He went to the telegraph office and sent a message to someone in Boston whose name he didn't know. Operator Crawford said that the paper caught fire right after the message was sent, so the contents of this telegram were never written down. Crawford did remember the address, though: the Department of Anthropology at Miskatonic University, a school that, according to later research, never existed. Elijah Hollow went to Dr. Forrester's house the same day. The doctor's journal has a full account of this surprise meeting. Elijah Hollow came to my door at dusk. It was the first time I had heard him speak without his brother there. He asked for a specific medical book from my library, Harrington's Anatomical Divergences in Isolated Communities. When I asked him why, he smiled in a way that made me feel uneasy and said, "Confirmation, doctor. We need to be sure about the capacity of the human form." I said no, and he thanked me in a strange way and left. The most troubling thing he said before he left was, "It matters little. We have found a better vessel." Everything changed on the 5th of November, 1903. The front page of the Cumberland Gap Register said that 7 miners died in a fire at the Blue Diamond Mine. There was a small note at the bottom of page 3 that said Thomas and Elijah Hollow were missing from their home and there were signs of unusual activity. The sheriff put together a search party the next morning. The mine fire happened in Shaft 7, which is where the Hollow brothers mostly worked. The fire started at 3:17 a.m., according to company records, but no miners were supposed to be in that area at that time. No one ever figured out what caused it. Survivors said that the darkness that surrounded them was unnatural and swallowed their lantern light. They also said that it felt like there was a lot of pressure coming from all sides. Only 5 of the 12 men who went in to fight the fire and save possible survivors came out. According to Sheriff Parsons' official report, which can be found in the county archives, a search party of 12 men was sent to the Hollow residence and the woods around it. The cabin was in a state of extreme disarray, with furniture overturned and personal items scattered. The most notable thing was the floor of the main room. Boards had been pried up, and a hole about 6 feet deep had been dug into the ground below the house. The contents of the hole were unknown because the search was interrupted by the approach of a severe storm. The official report doesn't say what was found in that hole, but Dr. Forrester's journal fills in the blanks. November 6th, 1903. Sheriff Parsons came to my door at dusk, looking very upset. He told me that he had found a bunch of personal items in the pit beneath the Hollow cabin. These were things that belonged to different townspeople who had nothing to do with the brothers. A hairbrush belonging to Mrs. Whitaker, a child's toy from the Schmidt family, and a pocket watch belonging to Judge Harmon. None of these people had reported these items missing. More troubling were the dozens of small cloth pouches containing what looked like soil from different places, each carefully labeled with the names of households throughout the county. The doctor goes on, "What worried me the most was Parsons's description of markings carved into the pit's walls. They were symbols like those I've seen in some anthropological texts about prehistoric cave paintings. but they were arranged in patterns that suggested a level of mathematical precision that even primitive people couldn't understand. Parsons insisted that I go with him tomorrow to properly document these findings. I agreed, but with a lot of hesitation. The brothers had been allowed to dig a well in 1899, but it was nowhere to be found. Instead, the digging under their cabin seemed to go on in all directions, with signs of tunneling in many directions. It was strange that the dirt that had been taken away hadn't been piled up outside, which made people wonder where such a large amount of dirt had gone. The next day, the search started again, this time in the woods around the cabin. It was at this point that they found what locals would later call the circle. This information came from a report by Deputy James Crawford that was marked not for public record and sealed until 1950. About 400 yards north of the hollow cabin, we found a clearing that wasn't on any forest survey. It was perfectly circular, about 30 feet in diameter, and there was no vegetation growing there. The soil looked burned or scorched, but there was no sign of fire. In the middle was a rough stone altar. The things found on this altar are listed in Evidence Log Nurse 7, but I don't think they should ever be made public. We have never found evidence, Log Nurse 7. But a personal letter from Deputy Crawford to his brother that was found in family papers in 1966 gives a chilling look. I can't speak directly about what we found in that circle. I have taken an oath, as have all who were there. But I will say this, it went against natural law. Objects were suspended without support, metal was mixed with stone, and organic matter was in states of change that no science can explain. And everywhere, those damnable markings, the same symbols found beneath the cabin, but bigger and more complex. The sheriff told the photographer, Burke, to take pictures of everything and then destroy it on site. Burke refused to develop the plates, though, and instead smashed them with a hammer and threw the pieces into the river. We do know that the search party didn't want to go back to the woods the next day. Sheriff Parsons said in his last report that conditions have made further search untenable, even though the weather was good that week. Peter Collins started talking again around this time, which is strange. Dr. Rice Forrester says, November 9th, 1903. Called to Collins' farm where Peter, who had been silent for almost 3 months, began speaking in the early hours of the morning. His words are troubling and often don't make sense. He keeps talking about the brothers who weren't brothers and what they called up from the deep place. Most worrying is that he keeps saying they aren't missing, they're multiplying. I have recommended he be transferred to the state hospital in Lexington for specialized care. Dr. Forrester's notes have parts of Peter's ramblings written down exactly as they were spoken. They found a door that shouldn't be opened. Not brothers. Same man split across time. Collector and collected. They need 13 to complete the pattern. I was to be one, but they said my mind was too rigid and wouldn't bend properly. The others will be better. They sing to what waits below. It listens. It's so hungry after sleeping so long. People said these crazy things were just the result of trauma and maybe brain damage. But for some reason, over the next 3 days, 7 more people in Cumberland Gap started showing the same signs. Periods of catatonia, followed by frenzied speech about the pattern and the awakening. The only thing they all had in common was that they lived in homes where the Hollow brothers had taken soil samples. Peter Collins was moved, but he never made it there. The transport wagon was found on the Wilderness Road with no sign of the driver or the patient. There was a short investigation into this case, but it was eventually put away with a lot of other disappearances that happened in the area at the time when police had limited resources. Later, Oliver Blackburn, a conductor on the L&N Railroad, said he saw Peter Collins get on a train going north that same day. In his statement to Sheriff Parsons, he said, "It was Collins, no doubt, but he wasn't alone. A tall man in black was with him, and his hat hid his face. The strange thing was how they moved in perfect sync, as if they were connected by invisible strings. Collins' eyes were open but empty. He didn't respond when I called his name." The search for the Hollow brothers officially ended on November 15th. The county took their property because they didn't pay their taxes, but records show that they did pay them in full. The cabin was boarded up, and there was a strange town meeting at the Cumberland Gap Courthouse. There are no official notes from this meeting. A letter from Eleanor Simmons to her sister in Louisville on November 16, though, gives us a glimpse. "The meeting last night was unlike anything I've seen." Sheriff Parsons talked briefly about moving on from recent events, but he never said what they were. Then Judge Harmon suggested what he called a pact of silence for the good of the town. No one voted, but everyone understood. We are not to speak of the Hollow brothers again, not to our children, not to outsiders, not even among ourselves. What was most disturbing was watching Peter Collins's mother cry silently in the back row while everyone pretended not to notice. Eleanor goes on to say, "The weirdest part was when Reverend Grant tried to lead a prayer. As soon as he said the words, 'Protect us from evil,' every lantern in the courthouse went out at once." Judge Harmon called the meeting to order right away. As we left, I noticed something strange. The courthouse clock said 8:45, but the church bell had just struck midnight. And so, everyone in Cumberland Gap decided to forget. People stopped talking about the Hollow brothers. Children were hushed if they asked about the boarded-up cabin. When outsiders asked, they were met with blank stares or deliberate misdirection. But forgetting is not the same as making a decision. There were small changes in the community in the weeks after the person went missing. The December 7, 1903 issue of the Cumberland Gap Register has a lot of typos. Some letters are switched around or inverted in ways that, when mapped across the whole paper, make the same symbols that are found in the Hollow excavation. Harrison Wells, the newspaper's editor, quit the next day without giving a reason and moved to Cincinnati. The production records for the Blue Diamond Mine show an unexpected turn of events. Coal taken from Shaft 7, where the fire had happened, suddenly tested at almost twice the thermal efficiency of earlier samples. Even though workers didn't want to, the company expanded its operations in that area. Before the end of the year, 3 more miners went missing in that shaft. People thought they had died in cave-ins, but no bodies were found. People in the area called the years after the bad years. Between 1904 and 1910, the mine collapsed 3 times, killing 46 people. A tuberculosis outbreak in 1907 killed a lot of people in the town. And the most strange thing is that census records show that a lot of people went missing, people who just disappeared without a trace, often after saying they had strange dreams or felt like they were being watched. Records of school attendance from 1904 to 1910 show a worrying trend. Children born after November 1903 showed strange signs of development. Mary Sinclair, a teacher, wrote in her notes, which are now in the Cumberland Gap School archives, "The new generation seems altered somehow. They rarely speak among themselves. Their academic performance is remarkable, particularly in mathematics and sciences beyond our curriculum. Most troubling is their collective behavior. They move in unison, without apparent signals, and during certain astronomical events, full moons, eclipses, they cannot be roused from deep, trance-like sleep." The cabin of the Hollow brothers was left alone, and nature slowly took it back. There are no fire department records to back up the claim that a lightning strike burned what was left to the ground in 1921. The land was never sold again or built on. In 1917, a geological survey team from the Kentucky Department of Mining looked into the area for a short time as a possible new coal seam location, but few people knew this. Their official report says, "Area unsuitable for mining operations due to unstable ground conditions." However, Dr. Howard Mitchell, the team's leader, kept a personal field journal that tells a different story. Instrumentation malfunctions near the target site. Magnetic compasses spin wildly. Film is exposed despite tight containers. The most important finding is that the temperature gradient inverts near the original cabin site. The ground temperature rises with elevation rather than depth, reaching 57 degrees at surface level despite the air temperature being 34 degrees. I recommend that the area be restricted not because it is unstable, but because of phenomena I cannot explain through any known geological process. The area stayed mostly the same during the 1,920 seconds and 1,930 seconds. Hunters who got too close to the hollow sometimes said they felt confused, with watches that ran backward, compasses that pointed in strange directions, and most often, The creepy feeling of being followed by something they couldn't see. Wesley Harmon, a trapper, got lost in the woods near the hollow for 3 days in 1931, even though he had hunted there since he was a boy. When they finally found him, he was very dehydrated and had been exposed to the elements. Dr. James Lewis at the Cumberland Gap Medical Center wrote down his story. He said that trees moved when they weren't being watched and that the ground changed overnight, covering up any trail markers. What bothered me the most was that he kept saying that he had seen the empty cabin intact with smoke coming from its chimney, even though it was supposed to have burned down 10 years earlier, in 1944. Margaret Fowler, a historian at the University of Kentucky, started looking into how mining communities in Harlan County became more industrialized. Her work took her to Cumberland Gap, where she found what she called a wall of silence regarding certain historical events in her notes. She was interested in the gaps in local records, so she started looking into the Hollow brothers specifically. Her research journal says, the 18th of April, 1944, the locals' unwillingness to talk about the Hollow case is almost pathological. When pressed, older residents physically removed themselves from the conversation. The town librarian says that all records from 1903 were lost in a flood, but there is no record of such a flood. Most telling was my conversation with Mr. Henry Crawford, son of the former deputy, who said only, "Some stories don't belong in books, Miss Fowler. Some were buried for good reason." Fowler kept going, finding people who used to live in Cumberland Gap but had moved away. She started to put together pieces of the story through these interviews, such as the fact that Dr. Forrester had a journal and that the deputy's report was sealed. Her notes from May 1944 show that she was getting more and more worried about her own research. Strange things have been happening often enough that I have to admit them. My room at the boarding house has been searched twice, but nothing was taken. The mail I've sent to coworkers has never arrived. The most disturbing thing is the dreams I keep having, which always follow the same pattern. A circular clearing, a stone structure, and symbols I can't read, but somehow understand. I wake up every morning at exactly 3:17 a.m., no matter what time I go to bed. Fowler wrote in her last research entry on the 30th of June, 1944. Tomorrow, I visit the old hollow site, where the cabin used to be. There has been a lot of local resistance to this plan. I've gotten everything from sincere pleas to thinly veiled threats. But I can't finish this work without seeing the site for myself. I've arranged for Jack Lamont to come with me as a guide, but even he won't stay after sundown. Margaret Fowler never finished writing her book. University records show that she took an indefinite leave of absence for health reasons. Reports say she moved to Arizona in July 1944. Distant relatives say she wouldn't talk about her time in Kentucky and burned all her research notes before she died in 1967. What happened when Fowler went to the Hollow site? The only account came from Jack Lamont, her guide, who wrote it down in a sworn statement to the county sheriff. We got to the old Hollow property around noon. There was nothing there but forest. Nature had taken it back. Dr. Bear took pictures, measurements, and soil samples, normal scientific stuff. Everything was fine until about 2, when she found a metal box that was half buried near where the cabin's foundation would have been. It was badly corroded. She insisted on opening it, even though I told her not to. Lamont goes on. As far as I could tell, all that was inside were old, yellowed papers. She read for about 5 minutes without saying anything, then suddenly packed everything up and said we had to leave right away. Her attitude changed completely. She was shaking and looking over her shoulder all the time. We were almost back to town when she stopped, grabbed my arm, and said, "They're still here." They never left. The brothers are still watching. She made me promise never to come back to the Hollow before she would keep walking. If it weren't for a highway expansion project in 1968, the story might have stayed buried forever. While digging near what used to be the edge of the Hollow, workers found a metal box that looked like it held personal items, including a journal belonging to Elijah Hollow, the younger brother. The finding made the construction project very difficult. Russell Jenkins's daily log says that excavator operator Vernon Mills refused to keep working after the box was found because he said his machine fought against him when he dug in that area. That same day, 3 more workers quit without giving any notice. The County Historical Society took the artifacts, but strange problems with the equipment kept happening. Electrical systems break down. Diesel engines stop working. The project is now 14 days behind schedule. The Kentucky Historical Society had the journal for a short time, but it mysteriously vanished from their archives in 1969. The archivist who first cataloged the items, on the other hand, made a number of notes about what was inside. They said that it was mostly unreadable and that it was written in a mix of English and what looks like a personalized cipher. There were only a few parts that were clear, and they kept talking about the transaction, the exchange, and what waits in the spaces between. The archivist wrote down one full passage that stands out. Thomas says we must not be greedy, says power requires patience, but I have seen what comes through when the conditions are right, and I cannot wait any longer. The soil holds memory. The darkness holds form, and soon we will hold everything. Catherine Benson, the archivist who worked on the journal, quit her job not long after. She wrote to the director of the society, "I can no longer continue this work in good conscience." The Hollow Journal is not just a historical document, it is actively harmful. Since working with it, I've had cognitive problems like losing track of time and having recurring numerical fixations. Most alarmingly, I started finding pages of my own handwriting that perfectly imitated the journal cipher, with no memory of writing them. I strongly recommend that the item be kept out of the public's reach, or better yet, destroyed. Several other things from the metal box were photographed and put in a catalog before the journal went missing. These included a pocket watch with strange changes, like extra hands and markings that seemed to track celestial movements instead of time. A set of surveyor's tools with the same symbols as those found in the hollow excavation, 13 cloth pouches with soil samples, only one of which was labeled Final Repository 13 of 13, and a daguerreotype photo that showed what looked like the same man twice, posed next to each other, but with small differences in facial features. A speleological survey of the Black Mountain area in 1972 found something unexpected. A large cave system that ran directly under where the hollow cabin had been. The caves had strange features that went against what geologists thought they knew. Some parts had perfectly smooth walls. The temperature stayed at a constant 57 degrees no matter how deep they were. And most importantly, they had a lot of rare earth minerals that aren't usually found in Kentucky limestone formations. Dr. Lawrence Hodge, who led the survey, only wrote one paper about the find before giving up on the research. He wrote in his field notes, which were made public through a Freedom of Information request in 2010, "The cave system looks fake in some places, but there are no tool marks or signs of blasting. Some chambers have perfect acoustic properties. A whisper at one end can be heard clearly 100 feet away. The most disturbing thing is the central chamber, where all our electronic equipment stopped working at the same time, and team members reported feeling very disoriented and losing their memory for a short time. The local guide refused to go into this chamber, saying it was where they called it through." The story of the Hollow Brothers has come up again and again since then. A folklore student interviewed older people in Harlan County in 1982. They told stories about the Hollow Men and those who called themselves brothers. These stories often didn't match up with official records, which made it seem like the brothers had been in the area since the 1,870 seconds and hadn't aged. Some people said that the brothers weren't really brothers at all, but rather the same person who somehow existed as two. "They weren't born, they were called," said one 93-year-old former miner. "Someone wished for help in those mines and made a deal they didn't understand. What came wasn't really human. It just wore humanity like ill-fitting clothes." In 1983, just a few months before she died at the age of 97, Edith Blackwood, the last living member of the family that owned the land where the Hollow Brothers built their cabin, gave a recorded interview to the Appalachian Oral History Project. Her testimony makes the story even more troubling. "My grandfather told me things he wouldn't tell the police. He said that before they sold the land, they found things on it that weren't right. A circle of stones that moved around overnight. A spring that ran clear during the day but black as ink at night, and once, a man who came to the door asking for shelter during a storm. His footprints in the mud showed no toes, just smooth ovals, like a doll's feet. She went on, "Grandfather said he knew the taller one when the Hollow men came to buy the land. He swore it was the same strange visitor from 30 years ago, unchanged, and didn't age a day. He sold the land for a low price because he wanted to get rid of the connection to it. He said that some places aren't meant to be lived on, but lived under." When historians looked at the original sale documents in 1987, they found a strange clause that wasn't common in property transactions from that time. The undersigned seller acknowledges that this transfer includes all mineral, subterranean, and atmospheric rights in perpetuity, and forfeits any claim to discoveries or manifestations arising from the property, regardless of their nature or value. This specific language has no precedent in any other land transactions recorded in Harlan County during the period. The Hollow was mostly unexplored during the 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds. In 1985, the area became part of the Cumberland Gap National Historical Park, but park rangers informally marked it as a low-priority patrol zone even though it was close to hiking trails. Internal Park Service memos that were made public through Freedom of Information requests show that there were a number of times when confused hikers got too close to the area. Park Ranger David Martinez wrote about one such event in 1989. Responded to report of lost hikers near Hollow Ridge Trail. Located subjects approximately 2 miles from reported location, though they claimed not to have moved. Both were severely dehydrated, despite carrying adequate water supplies. Their watches had stopped at exactly 3:17, though they had been missing for approximately 7 hours. Both reported hearing mining sounds, pickaxes against stone, despite being miles from any active mining operation. The fact that some things keep happening around the Hollow is probably the most disturbing thing. Since 1904, unusual electrical problems have been reported in Cumberland Gap every November 5th. These problems include power fluctuations, communication problems, and equipment failures that can't be explained. Modern monitoring has found that electromagnetic anomalies have been happening consistently around the old Hollow property on this date. Another strange thing about the weather data is that the area gets a lot less rain than the areas around it. Storms often split and go around the Hollow completely. Farmers in the area have seen this pattern for generations and call it the dry shadow or the thirsty ground. In 1997, a group of college students went camping near the site, but they said they lost time. They set up camp at 4 p.m. and didn't remember anything until they were back in their cars at 7 a.m. At exactly midnight, all of their watches stopped. People might have thought their story was a joke or that they were drunk, but the physical evidence proved otherwise. Their camping gear was found spread out over a half-mile radius, with some items stuck in tree branches more than 30 feet high. More concerning was the medical report from Cumberland Gap Regional Hospital, where all 6 students were treated for identical symptoms: elevated core temperatures of precisely 101.3 degrees Fahrenheit, dilated pupils, unresponsive to light, and most peculiarly, magnetic resonance imaging showing unusual activity in the same region of their brains. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the neurologist who looked at them, wrote in her report, "The synchronized neural activity in all 6 patients defies conventional explanation. The pattern suggests some form of external entrainment of brainwaves, similar to what we might see with transcranial magnetic stimulation, but far more precise and affecting deeper brain structures. All patients report identical dreams since the incident, dreams of descending stairs and darkness while someone calls their names from below. The students' film and digital cameras didn't have any good pictures from their trip. They only had overexposed frames or files that were broken. But one student's voice recorder picked up something strange in the audio recordings. Researchers found 2 male voices singing in perfect harmony under the static and distortion. They were singing what musicologists said was a mining song from the 1,880 seconds that had never been recorded for sale. The Cumberland Gap Historical Society, which was founded in 2001, does not have any displays or information about the Hollow brothers. When asked directly, staff members politely changed the subject to other parts of local history. A local law that quietly went into effect in 2010 banned archaeological digging in the unmarked area that used to be the brothers' property, citing environmental concerns. What few outside researchers have found is a strange pattern in town records. Since 1903, any records about the Hollow brothers have been systematically removed or changed. Library records show that some books are missing pages, especially where they talk about the history of mining during that time. Some parts of land survey maps have been redrawn with small changes from earlier versions. Even the plots in cemeteries have been moved around, and some headstones have been moved or replaced. This pattern of erasure goes beyond just physical records. Longtime residents show what psychologists might call a collective blind spot. They can't talk about the town's mining history in detail, and don't even mention the Hollow brothers when asked about them directly. Dr. James Wilkins, a linguistics professor who conducted field research in Cumberland Gap in 2007, noted in his study of Appalachian oral traditions, "The most remarkable aspect of the local dialect isn't what residents say, but what they don't say." When conversations approach certain topics, specifically the events of late 1903 or the area now marked as watershed protection, land on modern maps, speakers employ a sophisticated array of linguistic diversions. They don't simply change the subject, they restructure entire narratives to circle around the omission without acknowledging it. This pattern appears in subjects ranging from age 18 to 97, suggesting an intergenerationally transmitted taboo. As part of a study on the effects of mining, an environmental survey team from Eastern Kentucky University set up seismic monitoring equipment all over the area in 2012. The station closest to the Hollow picked up strange data. Microseismic activity happening every 17 minutes, exactly between 3 and 4 a.m. every day. The sound recordings from the same equipment were even more concerning. The research team said they sounded like rhythmic impacts that were consistent with mining operations, even though there hadn't been any active mines in the area for decades. After 3 weeks, the equipment stopped working completely. When technicians got it back, they found that all of the metal parts had become magnetized in strange ways. Dr. Andrea Morrison, the lead researcher, asked for more money to buy more advanced monitoring equipment, but the request was denied without any reason given. What really happened to Elijah and Thomas Hollow? The official record says they just vanished, like many others did in the early days of Appalachia when there was no law. But the silence of an entire community suggests something much more disturbing. Something so deeply unsettling that the unspoken agreement still stands decades later. Some secrets are buried not because people forget them, but because remembering them is too risky. An old man went to the Pineville Medical Center in January 1965 because he had been exposed to the cold. It was a very bad storm. He didn't have any ID and only said his name was Thomas. The doctor who saw the man said he looked much older than his claimed age of 98 and was very agitated, muttering over and over about the other one getting loose. The hospital records showed that he tried to leave his room several times during the night and was found standing in the hallway facing Cumberland Gap, which is about 20 miles away. Nurses said that he would talk to himself in what sounded like 2 different voices, as if he were having a conversation. Dr. Harold Jenkins, who took care of the patient, wrote down some notes in his personal journal. "The man who calls himself Thomas has medical problems that I can't explain. His body temperature stays at a constant 94.6 degrees, no matter what happens outside. X-rays show that his bones are denser than normal, which is more like mineral deposits than human bone. His blood work is the most troubling. His hemoglobin levels and cellular structures are unlike anything I've seen in medical literature. If I didn't know better, I'd say he isn't completely human." 3 days later, the man died. There was never any next of kin found. The hospital records show that the only things he had with him were the clothes he was wearing and a small cloth pouch with dirt in it. The pouch said, "Cumberland Gap, 1903. No one ever claimed his body, so it was buried in a grave with no name." The official death certificate doesn't say anything about it. But Dr. Jenkins wrote down that the body was decomposing at an unprecedented rate, basically turning into unidentifiable organic material within hours of death, even though it was kept in the morgue's refrigerator. The doctor also said that all of the medical staff who had direct contact with the body later had the same symptoms: insomnia, sleeping in specific compass directions, and vivid dreams of going downstairs. In 1978, Workers who were expanding the Pineville Cemetery found an empty coffin where records said Thomas had been buried. Inside the coffin was only a thin layer of black powder and another cloth bag of dirt. This finding was kept secret, and county records about the burial were changed to show a different place. Over the next few decades, there were occasional reports of strange things happening in the area around Cumberland Gap. Hikers have said that they have met tall, thin men on remote trails who ask strange questions about the depth of caves or what the soil is made of. Workers at the few remaining mines have said that they sometimes hear two voices singing in perfect harmony from old tunnels. And most often, people say they have dreams of seeing the same people standing perfectly still at the edges of their property. Michael Reynolds, an archaeology student at the University of Tennessee, became interested in the Hollow case in 2015 after reading about it in his great-grandfather's journal. Even though locals told him not to, he used ground-penetrating radar to look at the area where the cabin was said to have been. His results were never officially published, but emails he sent to his faculty advisor after he went missing in 2016 talked about something strange. The subsurface imaging shows what looks like a structure that goes at least 300 feet below the surface, which is much deeper than any mining operation would have reached in the early 1900s. The formation has perfect symmetry and looks empty, with walls that are denser than normal. The most strange thing is that when we compared scans taken 3 days apart, the internal dimensions had changed, as if the structure is slowly growing. People last saw Reynolds on the 5th of November 2016 when he went into the Cumberland Gap National Historical Park. They found his backpack and research tools neatly arranged in a perfect circle near the old Hollow property. There has been no other sign of him found, even after extensive searches. People in Harlan County still talk about strange things happening near the old Hollow, compasses that don't point north, watches that go backward, and the feeling that something is following you but you can't see it. Hunting dogs still won't go into some parts of the forest. And people in the area still tell their kids, don't go into the Hollow after dark. If you hear someone calling your name from the trees, don't answer. And don't ever talk about the brothers who used to live there. Some stories don't end when we stop telling them. They're just waiting for someone to speak them back into existence. Sometimes, modern scientific tools pick up strange things in the area, like unexplained radiation signatures, localized magnetic field distortions, and what one researcher called temporal inconsistencies, which happen when atomic clocks get out of sync for a short time when they are put in certain parts of the Hollow. These phenomena are predominantly unrecorded in peer-reviewed literature, with researchers frequently discontinuing their studies after initial investigations. What is known, though, is that Cumberland Gap had an unusual demographic pattern in the 100 years after the Hollow brothers went missing. Census data shows that Cumberland Gap has kept the same number of residents over the years, even though it has had economic problems and the general population has been declining, which is common in Appalachian mining towns. From 1910 to 2010, there were always 1,013 residents recorded in every census, even though there were births, deaths, and people moving in and out of the area. A 2008 medical study that was later retracted without explanation found that the town has an unusually high rate of identical twins, 317% higher than the national average. This is even more disturbing. Doctors in the area have noticed that these twins often act in the same way and have the same dreams, especially when they are teenagers. There are signs of activity at the Blue Diamond Mine, which officially closed in 1957, in aerial surveys that are done from time to time. There are heat signatures that don't match those of an abandoned building, especially around Shaft 7, where the Hollow brothers mostly worked. Satellite images sometimes show strange light coming from the sealed entrances, especially around the anniversary of the brothers' disappearance. Digital mapping of the area in 2019 showed another strange thing. The exact spot where the empty cabin used to be looks different depending on when you look at it. During the day, satellite images only show thick forest, but at night, they sometimes show what looks like a clearing and a small building. When analysts tried to figure out what was going on, they found that the digital files with these pictures get messed up at exactly 3:17 a.m. No matter what computer system is used, on the day they are processed. People say that if you stand at the edge of Cumberland Gap as the sun sets and listen closely, You might hear old mining songs, sung in a voice that sounds like both one man and two. But people who live there know better than to listen for too long. They know that some songs are better not to hear. They know why no one ever talks about the Hollow brothers. They know what happens to people who do. There is a folktale that has been passed down in whispers among the oldest families in Cumberland Gap. It has never been written down. It tells the story of a miner in the 1,890 seconds who was trapped in a cave-in and was about to die. He made a desperate deal with something that spoke to him from the dark. He asked for help and for salvation. What answered wasn't a god or a person, but something that had been waiting in the deep places since before people walked on two legs. He would be saved and even helped to do well in exchange for being able to see the world above. But it needed a ship, or ships, to get there. The miner agreed without fully understanding what it meant. He was saved and came out of a collapse that should have killed him without any injuries. But from then on, his shadow would sometimes move on its own. And sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, his reflection showed a different face. The change happened slowly, as the being learned, changed, and split up, until one day the original miner was gone for good. And instead of him, there were two brothers who looked almost, but not quite, the same. Brothers who bought land above the place where they made the deal. Brothers who started getting ready for something much bigger than themselves. Maybe this is just a story made up to make sense of the things that can't be explained. Or maybe something is still waiting, watching, and remembering the taste of surface air and human form in the darkness below Cumberland Gap. This thing knows how to be patient, because it measures time in thousands of years instead of moments. The Hollow stays the same, no matter what the truth is. It is a place where reality seems thinner, where things that should be solid sometimes move, and where the line between one world and another sometimes shakes. And in Cumberland Gap, when the wind blows from Black Mountain, when kids have nightmares about going downstairs, and when clocks stop for a moment at 3:17, the old families remember without saying a word. They remember the time when they were saved by being quiet. They remember how the Hollow brothers cursed them,